Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Let's talk a bit about the Sumy direction. We have additional updates. Today we got additional videos, additional photos confirming the Russian presence inside of the village. As we can see, the village by the name of Urozhaine was captured by the former Wagner troopers, and we have additional photo from another angle with Russian flank in the above the town hall. The Ukrainians reported that they managed to restore control over the settlement, but yet they haven't provided us even a single geolocated video or photo confirming this. So that's why we continue keeping the territory under complete Russian control. Now let's move to Kharkiv area. We have additional updates. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to counterattack the Russian forces in direction of Gluboka. The Ukrainians were trying to capture or restore control over this stronghold, but every single Ukrainian attempt to attack was repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians suffered significant losses and were forced to fall back. This information also was confirmed by the group of forces north, the group that Russian army that operates on this direction. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, those attacks mainly were conducted let's say with the use of 30th Brigade of Operational Assignment Kharkiv. I'll remind you that during the previous few days we were talking a lot about Ukraine attacks as well, and those attacks in the northern part of Gluboka were conducted by the 42nd Mechanized Brigade. Also, those attacks were repelled, and the Russians added that as a result of clashes with 42nd Mechanized Brigade, the 2nd Battalion was completely destroyed and was removed from the line of combat contact to restore its combat capabilities. Fourth or fifth day in a row, the Russian sources reported about additional attacks in direction of Zelena. Today we got the same updates, but for now we still haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation. Just to remind you that currently the Russians are trying to capture this territory. So while the main Ukrainian forces try to counterattack the Russians in the village of Gluboka, the Russians are trying to storm and to capture the village of Zelena. So there are very heavy clashes, but neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians managed to achieve some results. Now let's move to Vovchansk direction. According to the group of forces north, there are very heavy clashes inside of industrial zone. So the 6th or 7th day in a row, we continue receiving reports about the clashes for this territory. Today the Russians gave us additional details. They reported that currently the main clashes are taking place for the main office building inside of this industrial zone. I'm not sure where exactly the main office building is located, but let's say if summarize everything, most likely the Russians already control around 50 or maybe 60%. So sooner or later, according to the Russians, they will capture the territory, and then they will provide us some details, maybe videos with the flags. On the other hand, in the eastern part of Vovchansk, the Ukrainians continue counterattacks in the eastern part of the town, and according to information we have, after the 82nd Air Mobile Brigade was completely defeated by the Russians and lost its combat capabilities, as we discussed, the Ukrainians have redeployed those soldiers who managed to survive in the 82nd Brigade in the area of Chuguyev. By the way, during the previous 24 hours, we got report that the Russians attacked Chuguyev with Iskander. Maybe the Russians were attacking the temporary positions of those who managed to survive from the 82nd Brigade. And now the Ukrainians replaced the 82nd Brigade in Vovchansk with the forces of 36th Brigade. So if summarize everything, as you can see, since the beginning of battle on Kharkiv direction, 2 brigades have already lost its combat capabilities. One 82nd Brigade and some battalions of 42nd Brigade. The next, let's say, in turn is 36th Brigade and 30th Brigade. So there's a very heavy losses, as you can see. Now let's move to the northern Kupyansk direction. We have additional updates from this territory. According to some Russian sources that we don't consider as a very reliable, but anyway, sometimes they post very interesting updates. The Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their their positions in the vicinity of Orlovka. They captured this territory, so it's nothing important, but they're just getting closer and closer to the village by the name of Petropavlovka. And according to the same source, the Russians established complete control over the village by the name of Rozovka. So this territory was captured by the Russians according to unconfirmed report from the Russian sources. If it's true, of course, sooner or later the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will provide us additional updates. Of course, significant progress by the Russians, and if this information once again is confirmed, then we're going to receive soon. We should receive additional updates from the fields, from these fields, and of course from Stelmakhovka itself, and of course from the villages of Vishnyovo, Pershetravnevo, and Kopanki. Now let's move further. We're going to Siversk direction. Also, we have very important report from the eastern part of Verkhnykamiansk. The clashes for this stronghold have been taking place since the beginning of this year. The Russians made a lot of attempts to capture the territory. Most of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians. And today, on the 11th of June of 2024, we got a report from the Russian sources on the ground that they managed to establish complete control over this territory. So to summarize everything from that report, currently the Russians control something like this, and this is important, let's say, area. This area opens the window, opens the gates to move and to continue offensive operation further in direction of Verkhnykamiansk. So this is the current situation. Of course, during those attempts to attack, the Russians were bombing and attacking Siversk and the villages and towns around the stronghold with Krasnopol, with aviation, with artillery strikes. So the Russians were trying to suppress the Ukrainian positions, to suppress their artillery positions, and while the Ukrainians didn't have any possibilities to use, let's say, counter-artillery duels, the Russians captured the stronghold. Now let's move further to the south. We have additional video from Razdolovka. Now the Russians are in active, let's say, assault phase. They're attacking this territory every single day. At least every single day we got these reports of the type that the Russians made another attempt, and many others. And to summarize everything, we see that most likely the Russians will capture the village very soon. We got another video of how they were bombing the territory with multiple launch rocket systems. Yet we haven't received any confirmations that the Russians captured the fields and the strongholds to the east and the northeast of the Razdolovka, so that's why we are continue keeping this territory as an area under complete Ukrainian control. Now let's move to Chasiv Yar. We have additional updates. As for the citadel and the eastern Chasiv Yar, we have the first confirmation that the Russians captured the territory around the church and the territory around the church. On this photo that was published by the Russians, we see the sign on the building saying that this is the church and many other things, and we have a photo of the church from some angle, from some distance. So to summarize everything, the Russians managed to establish complete over this territory, and that means that the battle for the western citadel in the eastern Chasiv Yar has started. We have also the video of the current situation in the territory. As you can see, the eastern Chasiv Yar was reduced to ruins. There are still a lot of high-rise buildings, a lot of places where Ukrainians can keep their forces, but as I understand, we can start counting days, maybe even hours, when Ukrainians will abandon their positions completely. For example, on this second, we can see the church that was captured by the Russians during the previous day and night. And this is the western citadel, the final siege, the final stronghold of the Ukrainian forces on this side of Siversk Donetsk canal. During the previous 24 hours, we got additional updates about the Russian situation on the Ukrainian side of Siversk Donetsk canal. The Ukrainian sources published significant number of videos of how they were FPV droning the Russians exactly in this area. We will not watch this video due to violence and casualties among the Russian soldiers, but anyway, that video confirms that the Russians do have a foothold in this area and that Ukrainians haven't managed to force them to fall back. Pro-Ukrainian deep state map updated their maps showing additional Russian progress between let's say M32 road and Ivanovska itself, and according to deep state, now this territory is under complete Russian control. For now we haven't received any geolocations confirming this, but I believe that this is exactly the situation in this area, but let's wait a bit for additional videos and then we will adjust the map as well. So the Russians continue improving their positions, and soon obviously very soon, and probably by the end of the summer, the Russians will capture Chasiv Yar itself. Now we're moving to Avdiivka area. We have additional reports. The situation with Novoalexandrovka is still covered with the fog of war, despite the reports from different sources that the Russians captured the village completely and that Ukrainians basically abandoned their positions without, let's say, letting about this know to other, let's say, neighboring, let's say, soldiers and groups. We still haven't received any geolocations that can confirm the Russian presence in the central part. So for now, we are keeping the territory as is. We've received significant number of details from the southern part of Novosilovka-Persha direction. Pro-Ukrainian mappers adjusted their maps, showing additional Russian progress on this side of the Balka-Babaki river. So according to Deep State, the Russians improved their positions and captured this territory as well. This is very important. If you remember, we talk a lot about this territory, because if first the Russians captured some foothold in this area, and after that we discussed that the Russians would try to improve their positions, and now we see that a day after we discussed this, we see that the Russians already improved their positions. But important things are coming from Novosilovka-Persha. There were lots of videos were published almost on the entrance to the village. For example, in this video we can see how the Russian FPV drone attacked the Ukrainian Bradley, who was heading towards the village of Novosilovka-Persha. After the first strike, the Russians made the final strike and destroyed Bradley completely. On this video, we can see another attempt from Ukrainian side to redeploy their forces to move towards Novosilovka-Persha, but that's probably its Max Pro also was destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone strike. So what is so important in both those videos, and the important thing is that Ukrainians on both those videos were moving from the fields towards the village. So they were moving, let's say, like this on the first, and like the same way on the second video. Both directions, both videos confirms that Ukrainians currently are trying to abandon their positions in the fields. Now, as we discussed, there are very high risk that the Russians would try to attack the Ukrainians in their back from the southern foothold, and will try to encircle the Ukrainians in this area. The Ukrainians understand this clearly, so that's why they try to evacuate forces to the village, and most likely those videos confirms, and currently we can see the process of complete abandoning and withdrawing positions by the armed forces of Ukraine. Now we're moving further to the south. We have additional updates from Krasnogorovka. There are very heavy clashes in this area. If you remember, during the previous days we talked a lot about the Russian attempts to attack along the 0531 road Solotka-Vadiano with the purpose to establish physical control over 0524. And as I understand, the situation becomes so critical, so that's why Ukrainians were forced to redeploy additional forces in this area, and they redeployed in this area Skala Assault, let's say, department. It's a Skala Assault Brigade or battalion, probably it's battalion. So it's battalion whose main purpose to counterattack the Russians. And during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians conducted significant number of counterattacks, trying to stabilize the situation, trying to force the Russians to fall back, and trying to restore their lost positions. For example, in this video, we can see how the Ukrainians landed in the area to capture the territory, but the Russians discovered the presence of Ukrainian armored vehicles, and as a result of Krasnopol strike, that small personal carrier and the Ukrainians in the trenches were destroyed. For example, a bit further to the north, we got another video from the same Skala battalion. It's a separate storm battalion of how the Ukrainians were attacking the positions that were captured by the Russians recently. On this video, we can see the personal carrier arrived in the area, then Ukrainians landed and started clearing the trenches. Currently, we don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians managed to establish complete control over the trenches, or just over the northern part, but we see that reinforcements have arrived, and now there are going to be very heavy clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Now we are moving to Staromaiorske area. Pro-Ukrainian mappers confirmed the complete Russian control over the territory, and they have also adjusted their maps. But on the other hand, we see now that the Russians intensified their activity in Urozhaine. During the previous night, we got significant number of videos in geolocations confirming additional Russian progress and Russian attempts to attack the central part of Urozhaine. First, we got the videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the central part with artillery, with multiple launch rocket systems, with aviations, with FABs, and after very heavy artillery preparation, the Russians launched the ground operation. And we got the video of how the Russians were storming the trenches, the fortifications of the armed forces of Ukraine, how the Russians were fighting among the trenches and capturing additional territories. We have adjusted the map. Most likely during the next 24 hours, the Russians will be able and will capture this part of Urozhaine, and then the main clashes will start taking place in the northern part, in the last Ukrainian defense belt, in among this rich network of the fortifications. So to summarize everything, probably a week or two, and the village will be captured by the Russians as well. So these are now let's move to Crimea. If you remember, yesterday we talked about the Ukrainian reports that they managed to suppress completely the Russian air defense belt in this area, that they destroyed significant number of S-300 and S-400 systems, and we made the conclusion that if that information was correct, then we should expect the attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack Crimea during the previous night. But during the previous night, the Ukrainians didn't attack Crimea. They haven't launched even a single missile, which probably confirms that those reports about destroyed Russian S-300 systems and S-400 systems were just wishful thinkings. And very interesting details are coming from the North in America, more precisely from Cuba. The Russians are heading their nuclear fleet to Havana, and we got some details, and according to information we have, the Russian flotilla is scheduled to arrive in Havana on Wednesday. The Russians are bringing nuclear missiles, and the Russians, the most important, are bringing on their boards the hypersonic missile Tsirkon. So the nuclear weapon of Russian Federation is going to become as close as possible to the United States of America. So this is the response to the NATO military exercises that are currently taking place in the Baltic Sea, because if you remember a few days ago, the American B-52 bomber simulated a nuclear attack on the Kaliningrad region. So that was just the mirroring response from the Russian side. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.